Hello, hello.
Hi, Willie. How are you? Good to see you again.
Very nice, Moin. Week on. I'm very well, thank you. It's getting a bit hotter
Fantastic.
here, I should say. I've just put on some moisturizing cream, having been caught in the sun this afternoon. Uh,
Well, Willie, I read your article in the Hindustan Times about how very self-sufficient you and your family are. MashaAllah, that's wonderful. You have goats for milk, you have your own vegetables, you have all kinds of incredible things. I can't wait to come and see your farm, Willie. When can I come?
we had some bees. Lots of people are suffering terribly down, and other people are finding it difficult living at home or living in their flats or living with their parents, or there's all sorts of things that are going wrong. This house is actually built for this, and I'm quite used to locking down here for 4 or 5 weeks at a time when I'm in the writing phase and never leaving the house. So it really doesn't feel that different from normal, and I'm loving it. Actually, I have to say, I
Yeah.
really, after 6 months on the road touring the anarchy around from LA to Adelaide, there's nothing I'm enjoying more than sitting here reading and studying and just enjoying a bit of peace and quiet. To be honest, loving it. And best
Yeah.
of all, there's no
Yeah.
FOMO. No one is having more fun. There's no parties we're missing.
Well done,
There's
Willie.
no
And of course,
nothing. No
um,
one is having any fun at all. That's great.
and
The
also
envy.
very well done on your Jaipur Lit Fest live, the Brave New World. It's doing exceptionally well. I had the good fortune to listen into Margaret Atwood the other day, and she was absolutely
He's
brilliant.
fantastic, isn't he? He's wonderful. I should say for anyone who's listening that we've got another session this evening. Two of the cleverest people I know, both Lloyd and I, but very Tom Holland and Stephen Greenblatt. Stephen Greenblatt, the author of Earth and the beginning of the Renaissance, and he's on at 9:30, I think, Indian time, which will be about 5 o'clock GMT. I highly recommended. You go to the JLF, either Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, and get onto that. It'll be a knockout. Someone's just asked me how my wine stocks are holding up. The answer is not well, but it's irrelevant because one of the things I do when I go into kind of work lockdown is I have a very rare moment of sobriety. It doesn't never last very long.
Is that very rare, Willie? Is that a very rare
It,
happening?
it's fairly rare, I have to say. I never managed to do it in January, which I know when most people sort of give up alcohol for a month, and I find it exceptionally difficult. I really, every night is a struggle, particularly if everyone else is drinking. But I've kept it up for nearly 2 weeks. Tuesday will be 2 weeks, and my only worry is that my youngest son Adam, who's in the house, has developed the taste of his father for a gin and tonic, and I certainly worry the stocks will be
Ah,
finished by the time that I do come out off the wagon.
well, Willie, as they say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
My aunt, starting quite early in the evening, on maybe about 5 o'clock, on her first glass of whiskey, and my father wasn't behind. So I think there may be something in your theory.
Will should we get started about
We should get
1857?
started. We're turning into a
And
pair of old sort of chat show hosts sitting here talking about nothing all
yeah,
day.
I think if I may just say, Willie, why don't you set the pace for it? Because your book, The Last Mughal, is such an iconic book. I've read it 3 times,
Oh, thank you, man.
and I can read it again and again. So why don't you set the pace for the chat? You know, go for it, and I will come in and I'll talk about lesser known stories like Veer Kumar Singh. I'll talk about Ghalib and Ghalib's incredible plight during those times mentally. And well,
Lovely.
you go for it, Willie. Let's start.
I presented I've got a nice Ghalib letter. I put a bookmark in, so
Excellent.
we can do a bit of Ghalib. Okay, so it's now, as chances have it, we didn't plan this, but this actually this week marks the anniversary of the kickoff of the uprising, which took place in Barrackpore, in a small insurrection among the company's own sepoys, and particularly one man called Mangal Bandi. Now, this didn't lead to anything particularly immediately, and there is a school of historiography that says that that in a sense Mangal Pandi's importance has been exaggerated because a lot of the action took place outside Bengal, and the focus on Mangal Pandi only really took place with when a man called Veer Savarkar, who was in many ways the father of the Indian Hindutva movement, wrote a book called The First War of Independence. And that was, in a sense, the first book which saw what was until then known in English sources as in English language books, always as the Indian Mutiny, as a national uprising. And to this day, this debate rages. What was the Great Uprising of 1857? The title we've chosen for this talk as the Great Uprising is a kind of neutral and inoffensive term, which is neither the First War of Independence, which is how it's known after Savarkar in India, nor is it the Indian Mutiny, which many Indians find offensive because it was, there were places where, such as Lucknow and to an extent Delhi, where there was mass civilian uprisings as well. Plus there were tribal uprisings and a whole variety of other things. It was a very interestingly complex mixture of different peoples choosing to rise up against the East India Company. Again, very important to remember, this is the East India Company period. This is not the British Raj yet. British Raj begins immediately after this. And so what people are rebelling against is not a nation state, but a commercial company. And also, very clearly in the sources, they are rising up partly on the basis of religion. Now, Savarkar doesn't mention religion, and he hugely underplays what I think most modern historians would say was the real center of the uprising, which was Delhi. And this is why I wrote my book, The Last Mughal, because Savarkar makes it look as if the last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, was this stupid old fool, senile, on the throne, and that the real center of action was Kanpur, with the last of the Marathas, and he hugely underplayed the role of Delhi while building up the role of Mangal Pandi. Now, in reality, I would argue that Bengal never rose up, and what happened with Mangal Pandi was a small and isolated incident, while the great weight of the rebellion took place between two Mughal centers, Delhi and Lucknow. Now, this, of course, went down very badly with the right-wing Hindutva advocate who saw everything in terms of Hindu dominance and Hindu revolt. The fact that high caste sepoys who were Rajputs and Brahmins would rise up and try to put the Mughal emperor back on the throne was absolute anathema to someone like Savarkar, who saw the Mughals as foreign invaders. And so I wrote The Last Mughal partly to give Delhi its due. And the figures are very simple. In 1857, there were 167,000 troops in the Bengal army of the East India Company. Of those, 130,000 mutinied. Some turned their weapons on their officers, others just left at night or found a way to escape them.
This was in Delhi.
This was in May and, sorry, I'm going to move the phone. In May and June 1857, East India Company troops at different barracks across India, particularly in North India. Remember then that in a sense, a lot of the big barracks were up in the Punjab and around Delhi. And the Bengal army, in their different barracks, in the course of May, in other words, 1 month on from what happened in April in Barrackpur with Mangal Pandi, beginning on May the 10th in Meerut and spreading like wildfire into Rajasthan, UP, Madhya Pradesh in particular. The sepoys threw in their arms, sometimes shot their officers, sometimes left quietly, and they went overwhelmingly to Delhi. out of the 130,000 sepoys who rose up in May 1857, 100,000, in other words, about 2/3, maybe slightly more,
Sure.
went to Delhi. And Delhi was the center of that uprising. Now, this is not the picture that you'll get in Savarkar's book, where all this is dismissed as a secondary center, and where particularly what happened in Kanpur is that emphasized.
So how do they make
Delhi
the center, Willie? How does what is? Sorry, I'm just so taken.
Sure.
Sorry, I have to ask you this. So, what are the initial reactions of Zafar, his family? What are they caught between this, looking at a flickering flame of hope and also knowing that this is going to be something that is going to be useless and futile to oppose the East India Company? What's going through the royal family's mind as the troops go in?
So a bit of background. So in the run-up to this, Zafar, who's now about 82 in 1857, this guy who in his youth had been very athletic, had been a fine archer, was famously a marksman and a good shot, a great huntsman, was athletic on horseback and so on. By the age of 82, he is a very old man. By the standards of the time, that's probably the equivalent to being 90 or even 100 today.
Yeah.
Was in no position to turn into sort of Che Guevara leading the troops from the barricades. And this formerly athletic young man had turned into first a poet and then into a Sufi. He had pupils. He took what's the word? He took
Murids.
Murids is exactly the word I'm looking for. Who studied Sufism under him, and he was hoping, above hope, that his favorite son, Mirza Mughal, would succeed him. But the British resident, who had been, particularly for most of his life, been a man called Thomas Metcalfe, was determined to try and move the royal family into Zafar Mahal, which is near where I'm talking from in Roli, and to turn the Red Fort into a barracks and to downgrade the Mughal emperor, who they dismissed as this figurehead of no real importance.
Yes.
Into a puppet ruler ruling from Zafar Mahal.
Is it also true, Willie? Sorry to interject, but it's so informative. But is it also true that the English were thinking of making him, reducing him in stature, and kind of just saying you're the head of the Timurid family, no longer emperor of Hindustan? Were they planning to do that?
They'd already changed his title in their own letters from emperor to king of Delhi. And one of the things they'd done was try to raise up initially the Nawab of Lucknow as a rival, which in the early 19th century they did. Then they toppled the whole Lucknow. So Wajid Ali Shah by this stage is sitting in Calcutta, having been deposed. And they're planning more or less to do the same sooner or later, really, with Zafar. And they, in their own heads, they think he's this very unimportant figure, sort of senile, waffling away with poetry they don't understand. So they are completely taken aback when their own army, not initially the people of Delhi, not the peasantry in the countryside, but their own sepoys who they have trained and armed and paid, who they've taken on campaign in Afghanistan fairly recently, when these guys not only rise up against the company and shoot their officers, but go to Delhi and put this old man back on the throne.
Amazing.
And this, I mean, no one from the British side had expected this, despite, there'd been all these sort of telegrams going backwards and forwards, and the telegraph had just been installed in North India. It's an important part of the story. They had heard drumming at night, and stories were said. They didn't know what was going on. They were nervous. They knew something was up. There'd been this uprising in Barakpur with Mangal Pandit, but they hadn't seen this coming. And basically, in a month, 130,000 of their own salaried troops, with their weapons, their gunpowder, their cannon, and all the stuff they, in their mind, paid for, rise up, move to Delhi, and raise the flag of religion. And again, Marxist historians in the 60s and 70s were very, very keen to emphasize the economic aspects of this. And there's a million things you could point to, of course, that that the company, which was a commercial company that existed to make a profit, and was there entirely for the point of view of making money. You know, you could show a million things the company did to irritate everybody in India. But the slogans which are put out in Delhi by the people of Delhi and by the mutineers who come to Delhi, and I'm using the mutineers in a very specific context here of you know, East India Company soldiers who mutiny and come to Delhi. The rhetoric that they use overwhelmingly is religious. And it doesn't matter whether they're Hindu, which most of them are, or Muslim. The Muslim divines are talking in language of jihad, but you have these extraordinary sermons which are printed in the Delhi Urdu Akhbar, where people use the Mahabharata as and other, you know, martial Hindu exemplars as a model for rising up, and they attack Christians. And this is very important. You know, this again is something that Nehruvian historians played down because they weren't particularly religious. B, they you know, they thought the world was revolved entirely around money and economic history, evolution, and so on. How religion can, in a sense, even if it isn't necessarily the main thing in people's minds, it can act as a rallying cry for the discontented of the world.
So, Willie, do you see this moment as a real sparkling example of Hindu-Muslim unity? Because there are some critics and who say that, you know, it really wasn't quite that, but then there are some, you know, incredible scholars who say this was the truly one sparkling moment, of course, before the freedom struggle that was led by Gandhi and all of that. But this was one moment where there was real unity between Hindus and Muslims to take on the East India Company. Do you see it that way?
The answer is yes, but up to a point. So yes, you have, so the mutineers are overwhelmingly Hindu because the East India Company, 90% of the recruits for the East India Company army are Rajput and Brahmin sepoys, mainly from UP and Bihar in modern terms. And the only Muslims who are recruited are the Sawas, the cavalry. And so the army was overwhelmingly Hindu. And they go to put the Delhi Muslim Mughal ruler, who they see as the figure of legitimacy, of pre-British. He acts as the rallying point.
Sure.
Which is not to say that they're not sometimes rude to him and his family, or that they particularly admire his leadership, which is dithery and slightly hopeless. After all, he's 92. He's not a young man able to make quick strategic decisions and so on. And for a long time, he can't really decide whose side he's on. And for the second half of the uprising, his wife, Zinat Mahal, is in secret correspondence with the British. So it's a complicated picture. So by and large, yes, there is extraordinary unity, and they're fighting together for the same cause. The people of Delhi, who are about 70% Muslim at this period, or 60% Muslim, along with the sepoys, who are overwhelmingly Hindu, are fighting in the same barricade side by side. But there are those on both sides who are not so keen on this, and there is a group in the Jama Masjid who are the jihadis.
You write about in your book.
Who've come largely from Tonk in Rajasthan. Who are armed with axes and so on. And there's a great anxiety that during Eid they're going to slaughter all the cows, which the British sitting up on the ridge are rubbing their hands, hoping it's going to happen because this will break up the rebel unity. And so Zafar, faced with this, rubs his head, scratches his head, and comes up with a brilliant plan. And he sends orders for the police to arrest the cows of Delhi. And the police are told to put them into the lockups to stop them wandering around like they do today, and to actually arrest them during Eid so that they can't be killed. And there are all these wonderful messages in the mutiny papers, which are the rebel correspondence, which is in the National Archives, which is the main source of my book, where where the policemen are complaining, we've filled all the lockups, there's no more room for the cows. So they then take over and go down to various other places. But eventually during Eid, the cows are rounded up, and none of them are killed, and unity is maintained.
But that's fantastic. That's a fantastic move on
We're rather hoping that. Yeah, and that's the kind of guy he was. One of the things that's very clear in his Palace Diary, which is another of the great sources of the period, is that he's very clear that his job is to look after both Hindus and Muslims.
He's half Muslim. He's half Hindu as well.
There's an occasion when. Absolutely, and there's one occasion I came across in the Palace Diary, which is very significant to us. So it's only recorded as a matter of fact by the diarist, and this Hindu comes up to Zafar in a very public place and says, "I'd like to convert to Islam. Will you be my sponsor? Will you help me?" And Zafar's very embarrassed and says, "No, he won't." Very intriguing moment. If he wants to go and do it, this is me ad-libbing. This is me ad-libbing now, but presumably, if he wants to go and do it, he can go do it, but Zafar's not going to help. But it's interesting. One can look at it both ways. On one hand, yes, definitely much more unity and much more togetherness than you have certainly at the moment in Delhi, where we just had these horrible riots last month. On the other hand, there is a danger of being overly rose-tinted about this, and there's certainly those at the time in 1857, particularly on the Muslim side, who do take a very sort of jihadi line on this, and who regard the Hindus as a conquered people. And this is, something that was very embarrassing for Nehruvian historians. It's something they wrote out of the record, which in a sense is what's given the right wing now the excuse to rewrite history. And I think one's got to be very open about both sides, both about the unity and the threat to that unity. If one is to get
if I may,
really,
full picture of Veer. I'd just like to, talk very briefly of an incredible story, which I think is, you probably have heard of it, but a large number of people have probably not heard of it. So if you can give me about 8 or 9 minutes, I'll talk about this incredible story.
Go for it, boy. I'm going to go and get my copy of my book so I can read you a bit of Ghalib when you finish.
So this is the story of a gentleman called Maulvi Liaqat Ali, and he was an incredible fellow who is in Uttar Pradesh as we know it now, and he's a Maulvi, so he's obviously Muslim, and he stands up and gets counted in this rebellion, and leads, his army into Allahabad, and he takes Allahabad. And as soon as he takes Allahabad, he realizes that he has this incredible mass following. And when he studies this following of his, he's amazed that 80% of the followers of him are Hindus. And particularly the Brahmin Hindus. So the Brahmin Hindus of the Brahmin Hindus of this particular village and this particular area called Chail, which is next to next to Awadh and next to Allahabad, rise up in support of Maulvi Liaqat Ali. And he puts out this incredible letter to Bahadur Shah Zafar, saying that today we have Allahabad, and Hindus and Muslims are fighting together, and what would you like me to do? He also claims that after about 15 days or so, he gets a farman from Bahadur Shah Zafar saying that you are now the Subedar of Allahabad, Maulvi Liaqat Ali. Keep the Hindu-Muslim unity alive, and as long as we keep the Hindu-Muslim unity alive, we can win back India. Now, Maulvi Liaqat Ali by this time,
that rings very true to Zafar.
Yeah, and so Maulvi Liaqat Ali at this time is buoyed with this support from Zafar. He takes matters even further, and he stretches himself out of Allahabad, takes a few villages outside there, and his popularity is growing immensely. In fact, the letter that, or the farman that Zafar sends him is today in the Salarjung Museum in Hyderabad, of appointing Maulvi Liaqat Ali as the governor of Subedar of Allahabad, as long as he keeps Hindu-Muslim unity alive. And that's fantastic. Now, as time passes, obviously the English gain a bit of traction. They get better organized. I'm going to cut the long story short. And after a bitter battle, Maulvi Liaquat Ali loses Allahabad. And in this incredible situation, he flees. The Hindu Brahmins dress him up in a unique disguise, which, so that he can't be recognized as a Maulvi. And he flees to Gujarat. And in Gujarat, he gets shelter by the Nawab of Sachin. He changes his name to Hakim Abdul. And the Nawab of Sachin gives him shelter. And for 14 years, he lives in Gujarat. After that, he moves to to Bombay, and he lives with Mir Bakar Ali, who is the prince of a very small state in Kathiawar. And Mir Bakar Ali has a house in Baikala, where he keeps Maulvi Liaquat Ali. People don't also know that Maulvi Liaquat Ali, during the siege of Kanpur, had saved the life of a 14-year-old English girl, and there would be a twist in destiny. And anyways,
this is Madam Wheeler.
I'll just give you her name. It's an incredible story. Her name.
This is not General Wheeler.
No, her name is Amelia Horn. And anyways,
right.
Time passes and he's forgotten. He's thought of as this Hakim in Bombay. But, the hands of law, especially under the British, are quite long, and they continue the search for Maulvi Liaquat Ali. And finally, in 1871, they find him. And they find him at a railway station in Baikala, and they nab him. And they catch him, and they bring him back to Allahabad, where he's put on trial. And they sentence him to death. At the trial, the person who comes to identify him is Amelia Horn, the 14-year-old girl whom he had saved in the massacre of Kanpur. And she weeps and she begs and she tells the judge, he is the Muslim leader, the Indian leader who saved me. Do not sentence him to death. Nevertheless, he's sentenced to death, but then he's sent off to Port Blair in the Andaman Nicobar Islands called Port. And he's banished there, brought back to Rangoon, and hung in Rangoon. So I just thought I'd share this incredible lesser-known story.
There's another story which is very similar in Kanpur, and the General Wheeler is married to an Indian woman. He's in charge of the defense of the British cantonment in Kanpur, which is one of the main centers of the uprising. And in the end, famously, that there is deception and duplicity, and as the English are marching out, they are massacred. And one of the survivors is General Wheeler's Anglo-Indian daughter, perhaps because she looks Indian, and she's abducted by a handsome Pashtun, a handsome Pathan, and is never seen again.
Willie, in your wonderful story.
They do, Moin, they do. She disappears, and I can't remember the date. Something like unbelievable, like 1912. She surfaces as she's dying, and she asks for a priest, I think, or certainly anyway, in some way or another. It's a long time since I've read this story, and it's collected in a wonderful book which I highly recommend, which was a book which was very much a model for the last Mughal.
Our Bones Are
Scattered. Our Bones Are Scattered, and it's a very, very detailed look at the uprising in Kanpur. My book, Last Mughal, obviously focused on Delhi and hardly deals with the other centers like Lucknow and Kanpur. Kanpur is dealt with in incredible detail in this book, Our Bones Are Scattered. And it's one of my all-time favorite Indian history books.
If I might
recommend.
Just bring you back, because this is a part of your book that has fascinated me incredibly. I just want to bring you back to what's going on in the Red Fort now. We have Zafar, who has these troops who are swearing allegiance to him. He looks at Mirza Mughal and says, will you lead? You've got Zinat Mahal playing, all kinds of, there are intrigues going on. Tell us what's happening in Delhi at this point in time.
So, the people of Delhi at this period, as during many periods of history, consider themselves to be very much the smarty pants of the 1857 Indian scene. They are the blessed circle. The courtesans of Delhi are meant to be the most beautiful. The poets of Delhi, such as Ghalib and Zork, are the most talented. The food of Delhi is meant to be the model for all cuisine. The Hindustani, the Urdu of Delhi is meant to be the most refined. And so when a bunch of Biharis, as they're viewed by the Delhi waters, turn up, 100,000 of them turn up and create mayhem in the city, there are mixed, it's fair to say, mixed responses. There's a lot of support from them from some quarters, and particularly the what Ghalib regards as the lower Hindu classes strongly support the sepoys. But Ghalib's own class is very divided. Most of these Hindus are Hindus, and Ghalib certainly dismisses them as Telingas. The first sepoys recruited by the East India Company were from Telangana, and the name stuck from there. Sepoys were known as Telingas after that. So they are not welcome from everyone, and they're very popular among some people, but they're not among others. And as the whole thing gets more difficult, as the siege continues, as food begins to run out, and as things get a bit more desperate, the sepoys begin increasingly to misbehave. They go to the coteries of the courtesans, and they rape the women. They raid the food stores. They raid the royal armaments, and there's a huge explosion in the armament center. And increasingly, there's a divide not between Hindus and Muslims, but between the incoming sepoys and the people of Delhi. And this is understandable. Whenever you have an army on the loose, an army of occupation, or an army moving in anywhere, it obviously needs to be strongly disciplined. And this is exactly what the army of 1857, the rebel army, lacks. They've come individually under their different battalions to Delhi. Each of them brought their own commissariats, their own weapons, their own armories, and the central command of Zafar's princes finds it very hard to get them to obey any one leader. Various people are mooted, such as General Bakh Khan, and sometimes they are followed, sometimes their words are not followed, and then the rebels run out of money, and they have to bring in the money lenders. A lot of the money lenders have hidden in the basements of their houses or run off so that they won't be called in. And there's a lot of hanging money lenders up by their feet. Where have they hidden their money? All this goes on. And as food runs out, and water runs out, and armaments run out, and as more and more British reinforcements arrive on the ridge, and what is initially a little British entrenchment surrounded by rebels becomes in itself a besieging army, as it's reinforced by new troops from the Punjab and Waziristan. And as things get tighter and more difficult in the city, and as shells and guns are rained down on the city, there is increasing tension. This is not a siege that is going well. And what you find as May turns to June and June turns to July, a lot of the sepoys give up and go home. They creep out at night. They find different ways of leaving the city. There's a harvest to be gathered, as there is at the moment. This is harvest time. Food is running out. And so gradually, as the summer advances, the balance of power changes. What initially had been an incredibly strong army, with the British caught with their pants down, turns into a starving, disoriented army running short of powder and weaponry, and food and money, being surrounded by better and better organized British troops.
A very specific question
and
here, William, if I may. Do you believe that Mirza Mughal was not up to it, and the fight or the turbulence between Mirza Mughal and Bakht Khan resulted in opening up, and basically having a weakened situation, and opening up an avenue for the British?
So, whoever was responsible, there is definitely a lack of unity on the rebel side. There's no one commander that everyone instantly obeys. And this leads to the enormous number of rebels becoming in itself an issue, because these guys have to be given gunpowder, they have to be given food, and all of it's running in short supply in July. Plus, the harvest has to be gathered, and a lot of these people want to go home. Plus, the British have got their act together, and Sikhs and Waziris have recruited up to the East India Company Army, and the number of reinforcements arriving in the British camp increases each month, while the number of defections from the rebel camp increases each month. So slowly you see what's initially in a very strong rebel position giving way to a stronger and stronger British position. And finally, in the last months of September, the kind of super guns arrived from the Punjab. There's this place called Firozpur, which is the center of the armaments of the East India Company, beyond Lahore in the Punjab. And there they have 2 or 3 enormous mega cannons, which are hauled down the Grand Trunk Road by this guy who, for the British at the time, was a hero, but to a modern reader is this sort of imperial psychopath called John Nicholson. And Nicholson turns up with the super guns in late August. The guns turn up early September. And finally, the British have really got their stuff together. They've got an army, they've got the guns, the rebels are starving, a lot of them are dispirited, there's no one command, there's no money, there's no food. And then on the 15th of September, finally the guns are placed against Kashmiri Gate. The British troops move down from the ridge into Kutsiabag, where the ISBT bus stop is now, and there's the final assault on Delhi, and it's incredibly bloody. It's one of the most both sides are not going to give any quarter at all. And then the rebels put up such resistance, even though many of them have defected, they're running short of everything. Even so, they managed to stop the British advance into Delhi. And for 4 days, the whole thing hangs in the balance. And it could go either way. The rebels have stopped the advance, they could easily push one forward. And then there's a final, incredibly unfortunate incident on I can't remember the dates, 18th of September, something like that. There is an eclipse of the sun, which in Hindu thought is meant to presage the change of a dynasty or disaster. And to this day, I've got Orthodox Hindu friends in Rajasthan who will go inside during eclipses and stay, pull the curtains, go underground. They will not allow an eclipse to take place in their sight. So this tradition continues among the conservative and so on. And this is taken as a sign that the rebellion's over. And the morning after the eclipse, the British wake up in their trenches to find that the Indian trenches are deserted. The rebel troops have disappeared. There's no one there. And they don't know this, but overnight, Zafar has known about this and has left by the water gate of the Red Fort and floated down to Nizamuddin with his most precious ancestral relics, which he deposits with the peers of Nizamuddin, the Sufi shrine. And he then goes to wait his fate in Humayun's tomb, while his wife, Zeenat Mahal, has been in touch with the British intelligence officer, William Hodson. She sends a message saying, come and pick us up. So the British troops advance gingerly through the city, completely shuttered up and empty. Everyone describes it as this very eerie scene. They don't know where everyone's gone. And at each point they arrive at a new street expecting to be ambushed. There's no one there. There's no sign of a single soldier. And Theophilus Metcalfe, who's the son of Thomas Metcalfe, is leading the rebel troops. He knows Delhi backwards. He grew up there. And it's only when they arrive by the north gate of the Delhi Jama Masjid that anything happens. They're walking gingerly down the street, very nervous, knowing that there must be someone somewhere. And suddenly the gates of the Jama Masjid open, swing wide, and out pour the kind of nutcase jihadis from Tog who've been sitting there, the guys who were going to slaughter the cows if they got their hands on, if Saf had the rest of it. And these wide-eyed guys, not armed with firearms, they're armed with axes, come pouring down the steps of the Jama Masjid with these double-handed axes they brought with them from Tog. And finally, there's someone for the British to fire at. So there's this sort of last battle between battle axe wielding jihadis from Tog and the Eastern Company troops.
Was
and
it a complete
then
slaughter?
followed
On the steps of the Jama Masjid, was it a complete slaughter, or did the sepoys have casualties as well?
I think, you know, everyone had casualties, but from that point, once, in a sense, the shots have started being fired, the British troops run amok. They run into buildings, they rape the women, they shoot dead every male after the age of 16. And I'll just read a letter. There's a guy called Edward Vibart, who was a young officer. All his family had been shot in Kanpur, and he was longing for revenge. He was this sort of young buck who wanted to make his name revenging his sisters. But he is appalled by what happens next. He says, the orders went out to shoot every soul. It was literally murder, he writes. I've seen many bloody and awful sights lately, but such a one as I witnessed yesterday, I pray I never see again. The women were all spared, but their screams on seeing their husbands and sons butchered were most painful. Heaven knows I feel no pity, but when some old grey-bearded man is brought and shot before your very eyes, hard must be that man's heart who can look on with indifference. And 2 days later, having massacred the population of Delhi, or the male population of Delhi, of course, a lot of people are fleeing out of Turkman Gate, hiding in what's now, I suppose, you know, Janpat area and India Gate and Raisina Hill, where the president's palace is, Rashtrapati Bhavan. All that area is filled with refugees from Delhi, while the British troops are moving in from Kashmiri Gate in the north, driving and massacring innocent people left, right, and centre. And then 3 days later, the British follow the rebel troops over to Lucknow. And this is a description. I'll just read you this horrific description of the British troops leaving Delhi. Now, this is a young officer called Richard Barter, who was part of the British force. The march, he said, through the streets of Delhi was simply awful. Our advance guard, consisting of cavalry and artillery, had burst and squashed the dead bodies, which lay swelled to an enormous size in the Chandni Chowk, and the stench was fearful. Men and officers were sick all round, and I thought we'd never get through the city. It was a ride I don't care ever to take again, and the horse felt it as much as I did, for he snorted and shook as he slid rather than walked over the abominations with which the streets were covered. Dead bodies were strewn about in all directions, in every attitude that the death struggle had caused them to assume, in every stage of decomposition. In many instances, the positions of the bodies were appallingly lifelike. Some lay with their arms uplifted as if beckoning, and indeed the whole scene was weird and terrible beyond description. The atmosphere was unimaginably disgusting, laden as it was with the most noxious and sickening odors. So Delhi, which is the largest city in India at this point, is left a city of the dead. There is no one left alive. No one is allowed to remain in the city, with the exception of one street, which is where Ghalib is, bizarrely. He's allowed to stay because it's the Maharaja of Patiala's street.
And I'm seeing that a lot of people asking about Ghalib. So if I may just read a little bit about Ghalib.
Please.
For some of our some of the people who've joined us, and if you can just tell us where you're joining from, because last time Willie and I had people joining in from Argentina and Lebanon. So it'd be great to know where you're joining from. For some of you folks who don't know who Ghalib was, arguably, although some masters would rate Mir Taqi Mir better than Ghalib, but I don't want to go there. But arguably, the tallest name in Urdu poetry from South Asia. Ghalib, of course, was the court poet of Bahadur Shah Zafar, and he saw this incredible bloody affair firsthand. And he was so affected by it all that he wrote an incredible book called Dastanboi. And Dastanboi basically means a bouquet of flowers, fragranted bouquet of flowers, which actually lands up as a gift for Queen Victoria. But it's nothing but the pain and the torment and the desoluteness that Delhi is all about. And it strikes, every word that Ghalib writes in Dastanboi, basically it rips your heart open. So he writes, Ghalib, who had 1,000 friends, who had a friend in every home and an acquaintance in every house, now dwells in loneliness with none but the voice of his pen to speak with him and none but his shadow to bear him company. What a tragedy, what a tragedy. And just bear with me a second. I just want to read out another bit that he writes about Zafar, Ghalib. Sorry, not about Zafar, but just, sorry, losing you there. He writes, the heart is not made of either stone or steel, and so emotions will move it similarly. Eyes are not lifeless like the cracks in a wall, and so they are bound to shed tears at the panorama of death and India's and Delhi's desolation. The city of Delhi was emptied of its rulers and populated instead with creatures who acknowledged no lord. If a garden was without a gardener and trees without fruits, let your imagination run wild to the despair I feel. And just a few more.
Oh, lovely.
Which is one of them, which is really, I mean, it's tragic. In the noblemen's houses, there is no oil for lamps. In the noblemen's houses, there is no oil for lamps. In total darkness, they must await the flash of lightning and so find the glass and jug with which to quench their thirst. Their parched throats are like the streets of Delhi. Noblemen and great scholars have fallen from power. Noblemen and great scholars have fallen from power. Sorry. And the lowly ones who have never known wealth or honor now have prestige and unlimited riches. And then just one last one, which really tells you about the plight of sorry, just give me a second. There it is. Just got it. Well, you go for it.
I've got one by Zafar.
Till I find mine.
Ready for you. Yep. Okay, so this is an interesting poem, which allegedly was written by Zafar, but it's not in his diwan. Obviously, because it was written after the diwan was published, which was I think in 1852. And the idea is that it was Zafar's last lament, written after he surrendered himself after the fall of Delhi, when his sons were being hung, when Delhi was being pulled, emptied, when the Red Fort was being dynamited. And we just don't know whether it's legitimate or not. No one knows. There is some theories that it's not the real thing, but someone who is in a position to judge these things, Irfan Habib of Aligarh, firmly believes that it is real. And he had some reference, he told me, to it being read on the steps of the Jama Masjid as Zafar's last lament, as early as 1862.
Sure.
In other words, just after 4 years later. And there's a reference to by William Howard Russell to Zuffer writing poetry in his prison,
Yeah.
which was the stables of the Red Fort. Aditya Ghosh is asking what book you're reading
I'm
from.
reading from
Presume
Dastan
you're
Boy.
reading from Dastan Boy itself, which is published. Yeah. Aditya, you can buy Dastan Boy. It's available. Okay, so this is Ahmed Ali's translation of Zaffar's last couplets, and he's put them together. He gave this to me when I went to see him in Karachi before he died, and he gave me this translation, and he's turned a series of Zaffar's couplets into a sort of Tennysonian lament, which has a wonderful rhythm. And I'll just read you the whole thing. It's dedicated
please, Willie, all
Zinat
yours.
Mahal. When in silk you came and dazzled me with your spring, you brought a flower to bloom, love within my being. You lived with me, breath of my breath, being in my being, nor left my side. But now the wheel of time has turned and you are gone. No joys abide. You press your lips against my lips, your heart upon my beating heart. And I have no wish to fall in love again. For they who sold love's remedy have shut shop, and I seek in vain. My life now gives no ray of light. I bring no solace to heart or eye. Out of dust to dust again, of no use to anyone am I.
Yes.
Delhi was 4 more couplets. Delhi was once a paradise where love held sway and reigned, but its charms lie ravished now, and only ruins remain. No tears were shed when shroudless they were laid in common graves. No prayers were read for the noble dead, unmarked remain their graves. The heart distressed, the wounded flesh, the mind ablaze, the rising sigh, the drop of blood, the broken heart, tears on the lashes of the eyes. But things cannot remain, O Zafar, thus, for who can tell? Through God's great mercy and the Prophet, all may yet be well.
Really, absolutely brilliant. It really punctures your heart deeply.
This is from the last Mughal.
While we're
that's
in
Ahmed
Arabic,
Ali's
Willie, I might just
translation.
Read a little, just a couple of couplets.
That's Zafar, not Ghalib.
This is Ghalib's. So I just want to read this, which is the despair that Ghalib feels when he sees the women of aristocratic Delhi. And he writes, "Here in Delhi, I find the wives and children of wealthy aristocrats begging for alms to keep body and soul together. You need a heart of steel to bear such pathetic sights." This is a letter to Yusuf Mirza in 1859. And then this is a poem which I think is just soul-stirring. Each soldier of England today is acting like a ruler. Each soldier of England today is acting like a ruler, apprehending risk of life. Men are afraid to step outside. The chalk is now the hangman's park. Every house is a dungeon dark. The chalk is now the hangman's park. Every house is a dungeon dark. Every grain of Delhi's dust is thirsting for Indian blood. None can come or go at will. Movement has been stalled and stilled. Even if we meet our friends, weeping, wailing will not end. Even if we meet our friends, weeping, wailing will not end. Now our inner grief we vent, now our evil fate we lament. Or with cries rend the skies, tell our tale through tearful eyes. How can the severin scar be healed, O God, by such painful deeds?
Well, everyone's asking where's that from, Moin. Have you got the book? You can tell
Got
people.
that? And this one is from the Mutiny. It's just basically called The Mutiny Translations by Mirza Ghalib and the Mirs of Gujarat by Mir Jafar Imam and K.C. Kanda, who was a great scholar.
If anyone wants to read more about Ghalib, there's wonderful translations of his letters by a man called Ralph Russell, who died a few years ago, who was the professor of Urdu at SOAS. I can't advise on the best edition of the Urdu, but for the English translations, Ralph Russell is definitely the guy to go to.
Yeah, and sorry, I just want to finish off the whole Ghalib thing with just one little. It's just a little paragraph. He writes to one of his benefactors, Majru, in December 1859, and he says, I mean, this is 1859, so a year after the mutiny, and he says, this is not a poem, it's just a description of the devastation of Delhi. The city has become a desert. By God, Delhi is no more a city, but a camp, a cantonment. No fort, no city, no bazaars. 4 things kept Delhi alive: the fort, the crowds at Jama Masjid, the walk on the Yamuna Bridge, and the yearly fair of the flower men. None of these survived. So how can Delhi survive? Yes, there was a city once named Delhi in India. It no longer exists. So
Delhi does survive just about now, and the Fulwalon Kisar has been revived, the flower sellers thing. So you can see that every September during the monsoon, but it's a small shadow of itself. Anyone interested, incidentally, in 1857 in Delhi, as well as obviously, I'm very keen for everyone to read The Last Mughal, but the person who worked with me on this at the time was Mahmood Farooqi, and together we worked on all the sources in the Indian archives and the National Archives. Mahmood, a year later, produced his own book, which is a fantastic book called Besieged. Published by Penguin India. Highly recommend it. Anyone wanting to read more original documents from that time can go there.
And if folks are interested in reading in Urdu, then this is the Diwan-e-Ghalib, which is of course available. It's a fabulous book. It's brilliantly published, and it gives you insights into the man, into the scholar, and all of that. But before we end, I was asked to talk about some unsung heroes, and Willie, please feel free to jump in. There were a couple of them that I thought were incredible. One was Kumar Veer Singh, who fought right until the age of 80 in Jagdishpur in Bundelkhand, sailing down the Ganges. His hand was rotting. He famously cut it off and devoted it to the Ganges.
I've never heard this story. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. And then there was Khan Bahadur Khan, who took up arms and basically controlled all of Rohilkhand. He even set up an administrative system there until he was captured and hung at the old age of, I think, 85 or 86. And there's a little description that I want to read out. It's just about 3 lines. But this is a colonel in the British Army, and he sees this mix of Hindu and Muslim men, defending Rohilkhand just before the pitched battle. And he writes, this is Charles Ball describing, and he's fresh out of England, and he's on horseback, and in front of him are these men whom he describes like this: I see before me fine fellows, Hindus and Muslims, grizzly and bearded, elderly they are, men with turbans, some in green and some in red. They are giving us a tough fight. They will take the battle to us. So these are incredible insights. of Willie, was Nana Sahib was he ever captured? Pramod Kapoor Sahib is asking.
Nana Sahib was never captured, and the supposition is that he was last seen heading in towards the Tarai, the jungly, marshy area between Bihar and Nepal, and the idea is that he may have died of malaria, I think. I don't know the latest on that, but that was always what I've understood. I think we should perhaps say is that there are many fantastic books on 1857. It's the most grisly time, but it's also a time full of the most amazing stories. And two books I'd recommend. I mentioned earlier, Our Bones Are Scattered. Two other books I'd recommend are in non-fiction. Well, actually, three books. Two good non-fiction accounts: Saul David's The Indian Mutiny and Christopher Hibbert's The Great Mutiny.
Yeah.
Both very much the English point of view, and sadly, I think there are very few accounts so far written except Besieged from the Desi point of view. And in fiction, J.G. Farrell, the Siege of Krishnapur, which I think won the Booker. Anyway, it's one of the great novels of the 1970s, and well worth it. Personally, for my taste, I can never see the point of reading fiction when there is sort of the original non-fiction to go to, and in this case, it's so well done, the non-fiction, that it seemed I'd head first of all to that. I suppose just to round this off, Moin, if we're out of time, the final to start with, to take it to the end from Ghalib. The year that Ghalib dies, Mahatma Gandhi is born.
Ah, how brilliant!
And I remember discovering this just a week before I finished the book and being very pleased that this was a link.
Amazing.
And what's interesting, of course, is that this, in a sense, is the last throw of the old Mughal and princely order.
Yeah.
And they fail. 1857, they have their chance at getting rid of the company, and they so nearly succeed, but they don't. It's by the faintest slither that the company comes back, and men like John Lawrence and Henry Lawrence are so well organized, and the rebel side is slightly chaotic, however brave they are. And when independence comes in 1947, it's not from the princely classes. It's not it's not Ghalib's people. It's not Zafar's people. It's not Nana Sahib's people. Yes. It's the lawyers, and it's Gandhi, Nehru, and Jinnah are all lawyers, educated after 1857 in the British Raj manner, and all of them go to Britain for education, where they read about freedom and about democracy, and very rightly draw the conclusion that if America and Britain can have democracy and people can vote to change governments, there is absolutely no reason why India can't have it too. And that's what drives it forward. So there's only 90 years between the defeat of the Great Uprising in 1857 and actual independence in 1947.
Yes,
it's not even
90 years. Yeah,
but it's a different thing. This in the sense is the last throw of the princely dice, and thereafter it's middle class who take over.
Yeah, and you're right, Willie. It was the middle class, the lawyers who brought us freedom, brought India freedom. It could have been in 1857 a courtisan called Hazrat Mahal. And her story was incredibly unique. The courtesan who became Pari Mahal to Wajid Ali Shah, that was her title, the fairy princess. And the incredible story of hers who fought right till the end. She too, like Khan Bahadur Khan and Nana Sahib, fled towards Nepal. And they say there's a grave of hers over there. But what an incredible story. And I just wanted to say thank you, Willie, for another brilliant session.
Thank you, Moin. I enjoy these very much. As I say, it's my one social event of the week.
And, and thank you, Roli Books, Priya Kapoor, Pramod Kapoor, Kiran Kapoor, Kapil Kapoor, all of them. Thank you so much. And the audience, if you can tell us where you are, I have to do this one last thing, Willie, sorry, but if you can tell us where you are from, where you're joining from, it would be great. Anyone from...
They've done that, while you were wonderful. And we've got people listening from Saudi Arabia, from South Africa, from Vermont, very international, and some of my neighbors in Meroli. So we have a wide...
That's brilliant. We had them from all parts of the world. From Dubai, I just see someone from Dubai, which was great. Listen, guys, thank you so much. And thank you, Willie.
Please, guys, if you are game for more, 9:30 tonight, Stephen Greenblatt and Tom Holland, What Lucretius Tells Us About Pandemics. That's on the JLF Brave New World website this evening. And I really, really highly recommend it.
Fantastic.
Okay.
See you guys.
Thank you so much, guys. Bye-bye again.
Bye. Bye. Lots of love.